few years ago, I was very intrigued to see these jewels go up for auction by auction houses Sotheby's and Bonhams. The jewels on auction belonged to the last Queen of Punjab, or the last Queen of the Sikh Empire, Maharani Jindan Kaur. They included this emerald and diamond set gold bazuband. This is a jewelry piece that adorns the upper arm of the wearer. This enameled belt buckle with gems. This gold chand tika. This piece adorns the forehead of the wearer. This emerald and pearl strand necklace. And finally, my favorite piece, this pair of gold earrings. This is the piece that I am drawn to the most of all of them, and it was in this case with an inscription that read, "From the collection of the court of Lahore, formed by His Highness the Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and lastly worn by Her Highness the late Maharani Jindan Kaur." Some of the pieces up for auction were reportedly inherited by the Maharani's granddaughter, and they were seemingly auctioned off on behalf of another person who acquired them from her granddaughter at some point. But other jewelry pieces had a passage describing their background on the website of these auction houses. And what I want to draw attention to is the language that is used in the description, and how language can really gloss over the reality of what happened historically. So let's read the passage first, and then I will suggest amendments from a post-colonial perspective. This is from the official website of the auction house. Between 1849 and 1850, when the British took control of the court in Lahore, they entered the treasury, where they found the court jewels wrapped in cloth. Treasury was fabled to be the greatest and largest treasure ever found. The most famous and well-known jewels were taken away as gifts for Queen Victoria, including the Koh-i-Noor and Timur ruby. Confiscated treasures were sold by Messrs. Lati Brothers of High and Y in the Diwani Arm, meaning the audience hall of the Lahore fort. The items were listed in 7 printed catalogues, and the sales took place over 5 successive days, the last one starting on the 2nd of December 1850. So my amendments would read as follows. Between 1849 and 1850, when the British forcibly took control of the court in Lahore by annexing Punjab and overthrowing the last Maharaja of Punjab, they raided the treasury, where they looted the court jewels wrapped in cloth. The treasury was fabled to be the greatest and largest treasure ever found. The most famous and well-known jewels were stolen as gifts for Queen Victoria, including the Koh-i-Noor and Timur ruby. Stolen treasures were sold by Messrs. Lati Brothers of High and Y in the Diwani Arm of the Lahore fort. The items were listed in 7 printed catalogues, and the sales took place over 5 successive days, the last one starting on the 2nd of December 1850. So language does matter, and in reading this passage, these pieces are presented really as symbols of victory. This entire description reminds me of a quote by African writer and poet Chinua Achebe that is, "Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter." To put this into perspective, when the British annexed Punjab in 1849, they did in fact loot a literal treasure trove of artifacts that included jewels, sacred religious items of various religions, weapons, and luxurious clothing and ornaments. The Sikh Empire was rich and opulent. The founder and king of Punjab, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, preferred more modest attire, but he was a connoisseur and collector of jewels. There are accounts of Maharaja Ranjit Singh wearing the Koh-i-Noor diamond as an armband to showcase the might of Punjab when foreigners visited his court. He even decorated his horses with jewels. A British society woman who met the Maharaja and his courtiers in 1838 wrote of the Maharaja's wealth in her later published travel diaries. He, referring to Maharaja Ranjit Singh, does not wear a single jewel, but some of his favorite courtiers are covered with them, and all their dresses are perfectly magnificent. Ranjit's own horses being led first, his favorite among them. A living mass of his finest jewels on his horses, and the splendor of their harness and housings surpasses anything you can imagine. If ever we are allowed to plunder this kingdom, I shall go straight to their stables and the horses' trinket boxes. Yes, she did in fact write that in her travel diary. There is no exhaustive inventory that has ever been made public of what was taken as colonial loot in Lahore in 1849. But in 2023, The Guardian published a story that revealed the extent of the colonial loot in the British royal jewelry collection. Two investigative journalists uncovered a 46-page file prepared in 1912 from the British government department that was responsible for Britain's rule over the Indian subcontinent. The 1912 report explains how priceless items were extracted from India as, quote, trophies of conquest and given to Queen Victoria. That is why these pieces keep popping up at British royal exhibitions and events. Among the jewels plundered from the Sikh kingdom included a long gold girdle inlaid with 19 large emeralds, once used by Maharaja Ranjit Singh to decorate his horse. This piece was on display at a 2018 exhibition of the British Royal Collection. There are even some accounts that a high-ranking British officer in Punjab at the time bought or allegedly took many precious heirlooms for his own family after the British takeover in 1849. I will include the link to that Guardian article, the one from 2023, in the description box below. But this just showcases how glossed over the events of this historical period tend to be. The events that led up to the British formally annexing Punjab is actually the story of how the Empire of Punjab was dismantled in the year 1849. The British takeover of this region was very much a piecemeal process, and one of the best books to read on this topic is this book, Royals and Rebels: The Rise and Fall of the Sikh Empire by Priya Atwal. This is, of course, an extensive and nuanced history, but this book challenges the dominant and, quite frankly, very Orientalist narratives that exist regarding royals of this time and events that occurred during this time. The sequence of events that led up to the fall of the Punjab Empire are beyond the scope of my essay, but in this video essay, I am going to focus on a key female player in these events whose precious jewels are still going on auction today. The rebel queen, Maharani Jindan Kaur. I want to discuss her life, her legacy, and specifically how her womanhood was used against her by her political rivals as a queen and a mother. During the mid-19th century, she became a major threat to the British in terms of her influence and power. She was described in a letter by a high-ranking British officer as having the, quote, only manly understanding in the Punjab, unquote. Before I go on, hello, I'm Tass, and I discuss fashion, film, and culture from the Indian subcontinent on my channel, and today we are discussing Maharani Jindan Kaur. Maharani Jindan Kaur is somewhat of a forgotten figure in history, but she is revered to those who know her story. And to me, she is truly one of the most fascinating women in history. She was renowned for her beauty, her cleverness, and her courage, and she has really become a symbol of resistance against oppression. She ruled as Queen Regent on behalf of her son between 1843 and 1846, but her position was always very uncertain as the time was so tumultuous for the Punjabi royal dynasty. As Queen Regent, Maharani Jindan Kaur defied tradition by stepping out of the zanana and casting aside her veil by conducting state business in public. She also addressed the Khalsa Army herself and inspired her army to fight in two conflicts against the British. After the Sikhs lost the First Anglo-Sikh War, she was replaced in December 1846 by a council of regency under the control of a British resident. However, her power and her influence continued. Jindan Kaur had the responsibility of managing the kingdom thrust upon her whilst still in her early 20s and under deeply treacherous circumstances. Her 5-year-old son was made the new Maharaja after his older half-brothers had been killed in the bloody power struggles following Maharaja Ranjit Singh's death in 1839. When Duleep Singh and Maharani Jindan Kaur were enthroned in 1843, the expectation of the governing Punjabi ministers and the British political officers who engineered their accession was that the little boy and his young mother would be pliant puppet rulers who would stand by by and watch, whilst the new Prime Minister entrenched his own power as the de facto leader. However, to their dismay, Jind Kaur was not a woman to be overlooked lightly. Maharani Jind Kaur's womanhood was constantly used by her enemies in an attempt to destroy her credibility. She was heralded as the mother of the Khalsa, as she was able to rally her troops to fight in her name and in the name of her young son, the boy king Duleep Singh. In response, the British were always very fearful of her power and influence, so they spread propaganda about her, specifically calling her the Messalina of Punjab in order to undermine her authority. This nickname that the British coined makes reference to the Roman Empress Valeria Messalina, who was the third wife of the Roman Emperor Claudius, who was considered to be the most dangerous woman of the Roman Empire. Historical narratives paint this Roman empress as a powerful and manipulative woman who had a reputation for promiscuity. So in this way, the British attempted to pin these biased perspectives onto Maharani Jind Kaur, a powerful queen that they were desperate to push out of power. There were some British agents who did challenge this Messalina description of the Maharani, but this term was propagated by members of the British East India Company, who generally had a very hostile view regarding Indian women rulers. The British military officer Henry Lawrence was particularly prejudiced against Indian women rulers in his writings. The Indian, especially the Sikh queen and her paramours, are a staple feature of Henry Lawrence's extensive published writings. In his view, the rule of a woman produced nothing more than corruption, debauchery, and petty self-interested feuds. In a particular passage, he doubtfully manages to avoid conflating the British Queen Victoria with such negative gendered representations by playing up the racial aspect of his argument. Essentially, in Lawrence's view, it was fine for a man to behave in a less than exemplary fashion, but not for a woman. The idea that she, meaning Maharani Jind Kaur, could actually be a good or capable ruler was an impossibility in his mind. Maharani Jind Kaur was a female leader in Punjab amongst very powerful Punjabi and British men. Patriarchal dynamics obviously played out. While the Sikh religion has gender equality as one of its main principles, this did not permeate Punjab royal courts, as most queens of Punjab ruled in the capacity as regents for their heirs, not independently. However, royal women of Punjab did take on very authoritative roles, something that the British could not even fathom. But Maharani Jind Kaur faced a different reality from the Punjabi queens before her. Her reality was one in which she had to fight for her son's position as Maharaja and his kingdom. The most beautiful and moving portrait of Maharani Jind Kaur to exist is this one. In 1862, she sat for this portrait in England. It was commissioned by her then adult son towards the end of her life. She was 45 years old here. She died when she was 46 the next year, and the painter of this was George Richmond. During this time, she was finally allowed by the British to reunite with her only son after being forced to spend 13 years apart. At this point in her life, her health was deteriorating. But what I love about this painting is that despite the many challenges that she faced, she maintained her very defiant stare. She also wore heaps of jewels to sit for this. We see a chand tika, earrings, pearl necklaces, and even more pieces if you study the portrait closely. Her jewels will always be a topic of interest to me because the Sikh Empire and the court of her husband, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, was famed for its fabulous wealth. In fact, it was during Maharaja Ranjit Singh's reign that the Koh-i-Noor diamond achieved real fame. So when I see this portrait, it does not just represent Maharani Jind Kaur to me. Her heaps of jewels is really a reminder of what was once the empire of Punjab. Opulent, powerful, and rich. But knowing that Maharani Jind Kaur herself did not come from any wealth or any royal background makes her rise to become one of the most influential female figures in the Sikh Empire remarkable. Jind Kaur Ulaq was born in 1817 in a village in Gujranwala in Punjab. Until the 1947 partition, the Punjab was one of the northernmost territories of undivided India, bordering on Afghanistan, Nepal, and Tibet. At that time, Lahore, now in modern-day Pakistan, was the political seat of the Sikh Empire. Like I mentioned before, Jind Kaur was not born into a royal family or even one of high social standing. Though she and Maharaja Ranjit Singh shared the same religion, they were both Sikh, she did not come from an elite Sikh family. Her father was the royal kennel keeper, meaning he took care of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's dogs. She had two older siblings, a brother and a sister. Maharaja Ranjit Singh and Jind Kaur married in 1835. There was a significant age gap between them. At the time of their marriage, she was reportedly 18, while he was 55. She was his youngest and last queen. It is most likely that her parents suggested this match. Obviously, it was beneficial to them socially to be related to the king himself. Historians always note how Jind Kaur was very beautiful. Her fearlessness as she got older is then pointed out. Many Punjabi women had authoritative roles during Maharaja Ranjit Singh's reign in building the Punjab Empire. From his mother-in-law Sada Kaur to his many wives and sons and heirs, they all came together to become principal agents in state formation. During this time, marriage was a way in which clans were able to build social and political connections to act as possible allies moving forward. Maharaja Ranjit Singh entered into a series of strategic marriage alliances throughout his life to cement his power and territorial gain. There were also instances of protection marriages. Academics state that Maharaja Ranjit Singh had at least 30 wives of various backgrounds. He entered into marriages across class and religious boundaries as well. A few years after she married Maharaja Ranjit Singh, Maharani Jind Kaur gave birth to a son on the 6th of September 1838. This would be her only child. That year, there was a lot happening in Lahore. The Maharaja's health was deteriorating, and he died a year later in June 1839. Maharani Jind Kaur was a widow at the age of 21. After the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, Maharani Jind Kaur was in a more prominent position because she had a son. But her son was not first in line to the throne. The Maharaja had other sons and grandsons that were expected to continue the Punjab dynasty. For that reason, Maharani Jind Kaur and her son lived a fairly quiet life for some time in a place in Jammu. But power struggles started to occur. There was a frightening series of bloody deaths of members of the Punjab royal family by assassination and suspected murder. During this time, many ministers of the Lahore court became more ambitious and wanted to further their own family's wealth and influence. Other entities that played a key role in the events unfolding was the Khalsa Army itself and, of course, the British East India Company. In 1843, after another bloody coup, Maharani Jind Kaur's 5-year-old son was selected as the next Maharaja. Also, the major force of power at the time began to pass out of the hands of the Lahore court and into that of the military of the Khalsa Army. This incident showcases their strength and their king-making ability. In December 1844, Jind Kaur went to the Panchayat or leaders of the Khalsa Army and complained angrily about Hira Singh's, a minister's, disrespect towards her. The minister reprimanded her for spending large sums of money on alms for the poor, demanding that the soldiers respect her honor as the widow of Ranjit Singh and remove him from his post. There were reportedly other complaints she had as well. Maharani Jind Kaur's complaints were enough to move the army to action. They swiftly descended upon Hira Singh and another minister and took their lives. After this incident, Maharani Jind Kaur took direct charge of the Lahore court and had some semblance of influence over the army by maintaining this direct relationship with the leaders of the Khalsa Army. In formal courtly gatherings, the young Maharaja would typically be seated at the front with his mother behind him, screened from public view by a curtain. However, Jind Kaur was flexible with her maintenance of parda in such situations. When she felt there was a need, she willfully chose to confront the army directly directly. At times, she would reportedly harangue the soldiers with harsh, emasculating words from behind her curtain to humiliate them into doing what they were told. At other times, she would cast the parda or her veil aside with electrifying effect. On one occasion, when the darbar was terrified by a crowd of drunken and disorderly soldiers, she came out from behind her curtain, threw aside her veil, and addressed the people. The men were delighted, for she was young and beautiful. Jindan Kaur is known to have independently addressed up to 2,000 armed men in such a manner, apparently against the wishes of her male ministers. Her behavior with the army and at court demonstrates how aware she was of the symbolic authority she wielded as the widow of Ranjit Singh and the mother of the Maharaja. However, she was only able to keep the army in check for so long. The Maharani was very smart and perceptive in using the power of the parda or her veil to her benefit, but by 1845 the army threatened to replace the Maharani and her son with another prince, as they wanted higher wages amongst other things. Maharani's brother, who acted as her prime minister at the time, reacted by secretly ordering the other prince to be killed. British records overwhelmingly paint the Maharani's brother as debauched, volatile, and unruly. The army responded by killing her brother on the 21st of September 1845, as Maharani Jindan Kaur reportedly watched with her son, the boy king, in her arms. This murder was actually covered by the press in London at the time and made the British even more fearful of the growing power of the Khalsa Army. This was the picture used to depict the killing in the Illustrated London News. The army became such a powerful force that they even sought to control Maharani Jindan Kaur's personal life, even though she was Queen Regent. At the Battle of Sobran on the 10th of February 1846, the Khalsa Army suffered a bitter defeat. Thousands of Punjab's finest soldiers had lost their lives in the battle, which was one of the fiercest fought by British officers and company sepoys anywhere in India. Within 10 days of this battle, the British Governor-General had declared peace in the Punjab and had formally reinstated the young Maharaja Duleep Singh on his throne in the Lahore fort. Maharani Jindan Kaur inspired her army to fight against the British in this war, but she was betrayed by some of her own ministers. As a result of this defeat, valuable regions of the Sikh Empire were surrendered and ceded to the British and their accomplices. After this, the British sought to take control over the region. It also required that the Sikh royal court pay a war indemnity to the British. It was a major financial burden. There are records that paint a picture of Maharani Jindan Kaur and her son, the boy king, holding darbars or public audiences every morning together, where the Maharani would consult with her ministers in order to tackle these problems. She would always do this in the presence of her son, the boy king, never without him being there. As time went on, the British wanted to separate the Maharani from the boy king. In keeping with the Punjabi royal women that came before her, Maharani Jindan Kaur considered her political activity on behalf of her son as normal and inherently her right to perform. But the British realized that the Maharani wielded more power and influence than they would like. Two British officers in particular, Henry Lawrence and Henry Harding, engaged in a lot of political maneuvering to separate mother from child. This separation became a central feature in British policy for young princes of India. Basically, the British agents wanted to be the paternalistic figure in the young Maharaja's life in order to tighten their hold on him and on the empire going forward. Historians may not have appreciated the dramatic nature of the shift, but Jindan Kaur was actually pushed into a restricted Zenana environment by Henry Lawrence against her will. Within 6 months, the Maharani was reduced from a ruler deeply involved in all aspects of her kingdom's administration to a life of powerlessness and incarceration within the apartments of her own palace. As resident, Henry Lawrence increasingly exploited the misogynistic bent within Punjabi politics that had emerged during the early 1840s to encourage the pro-British Sardars of the Darbar to support him in imposing draconian restrictions on the debauched and unruly Maharani. His political diaries show that a close watch was kept on Jind Kaur's activities and on any visitors to her apartments. Despite having been removed from her formal role as regent, it is abundantly clear that the Maharani was determined to remain informed about what was happening with her son's government and to influence matters wherever she could, much to Lawrence's annoyance. So the tipping point really came in August 1847. Henry Lawrence had planned this big darbar or royal audience to reward those ministers of Punjab who were accomplices to the British. He expected the boy king to perform a ceremonial role in the proceedings. Understandably, this infuriated Maharani Jindan Kaur, as these ministers were essentially traitors to the Empire of Punjab, and besides that, a British officer had no authority to call for the ceremony. So in retaliation, she secretly instructed her son not to perform any ceremonial actions. The 9-year-old boy king listened to his mother, and when called upon at the darbar, he stood with his hands firmly behind his back and refused to yield to Lawrence's request. This caused Lawrence a lot of embarrassment. Henry Lawrence used this incident, amongst other things, in his letters to his superiors to call for Maharani Jindan Kaur to be separated from her son. He wrote that she would exploit her influence over the young Maharaja and urged that they deem her a, quote, dangerous and bitter enemy, unquote. He also included unsubstantiated rumors that she had romantic affairs, making her a, quote, unfit mother, unquote, for the boy king. He was able to exploit her unpopularity with some of her own ministers and members of her own court in order to weaken her reputation as much as he could. On the 20th of August 1847, the British issued a proclamation claiming that it had become absolutely necessary to separate the 9-year-old Maharaja from his mother, Maharani Jindan Kaur. The announcement further accused the Maharani of questionable behavior and also claimed that the boy needed a father figure at this tender age. And so, with this new patriarchal horror put into action, the Maharani was exiled to a fortress in Sheikhpura without warning or being able to say goodbye to her son. She was just taken away one evening around 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. by military escort and imprisoned in this fort as a state prisoner. Throughout her imprisonment, she wrote many letters to British authorities setting out how unjust their imprisonment was of the mother of the Maharaja. During her imprisonment, she was mistreated as well. She did not receive food or water at times. She did not receive her allocated funds. Her personal staff was removed. She was not allowed to interact with her own allies or council. Many of her belongings were stolen. After reading some of her letters, though, it's very clear that the separation from her son was what caused her the most distress. This is part of one of her letters to the relevant British officer in 1847. Without any fault, you have separated my son from me. You could have kept me in prison. You could have dismissed my men. You could have turned out my maidservants. You could have treated me in any other way you liked, but you should not have separated my son from me. In the name of the God you worship and in the name of the king whose salt you eat, restore my son to me. I cannot bear the pain of this separation. My son is very young. He is incapable of doing anything. You want his kingdom? I have no need of kingdom. There is no one with my son. He has no sister, no brother. He has no uncle, senior or junior. His father he has lost. To whose care has he been entrusted? Without any fault, why is so much cruelty being done to me? We can only imagine how traumatic this separation was for both mother and her 9-year-old son. She received no response to her appeals, but there was just more propaganda spread about her, calling her an unfit mother and of course the Messalina of Punjab. She was also accused of treason and debauchery during this time. She did not see her son again for another 13 years. By 1848, many of the Maharani's supporters and the Khalsa Army started uprisings against the British because of their mistreatment of the Maharani. Once again, Jind Kaur was being recognized as the mother of all Sikhs. From this moment on, she began to be characterized as the symbolic icon of both heroic Punjabi resistance and victimized motherhood, and is still revered as such today in popular Sikh history. A far cry from the way she had been perceived and treated by the Khalsa Army on the eve of the First Anglo-Sikh War. She was swiftly and forcibly exiled from the Punjab altogether as the crisis unfolded, being moved first to Benares and then to Chinar Fort, where she was held effectively as a state prisoner with a constant watch placed on her and her servants, over 700 miles from her son, in a complete reversal of all normal forms of decorum with the treatment of an Indian queen. The Maharani and her servant girls even had their baggage and their persons subjected to searches to check for any incriminating evidence they might have on them. At some point, the Maharani even hired her own British lawyers while she was imprisoned to push back against the slanderous representations of her in the Anglo-Indian press, and she was preparing with these lawyers to take her case to the British Parliament when a British military officer stopped this by blocking any further visits from her lawyers to her prison quarters. It later emerged that Maharani Jind Kaur, while imprisoned at Sheikhpura Fort, secretly plotted an anti-British rebellion. The evidence against her was discovered much later. She was able to communicate with her allies regarding this rebellion by sending secret letters to them hidden inside amulets. Maharani Jind Kaur was a resilient woman. She was a remarkable woman, but I think one of her most daring and most fearless feats was when she escaped from Chinar Fort, where she was being imprisoned at the time. In 1849, she managed to escape with the help of her allies by disguising herself as a seamstress. She trekked all the way to Kathmandu in Nepal in order to seek asylum at the court of the ruler of Nepal, Rana Jang Bahadur. Maharaja Ranjit Singh had a good faith relationship with the rulers of Nepal, and the Maharani was welcomed. She spent 11 years in Nepal, but she was still without her son, and during this time she was not even able to communicate with him via letters because everything she sent was intercepted. One of the most tragic consequences of these events was what happened to Maharani Jind Kaur's young son, the boy king Maharaja Duleep Singh, after she was forcibly separated from him. So if we go back to the initial separation, the boy king was 9 to 10 years old at the time. On the 29th of March 1849, the British compelled the 10-year-old boy king to effectively sign over his kingdom to the British East India Company and give the Koh-i-Noor diamond to Queen Victoria. He was then put into the care of a couple employed by the British East India Company named the Logans, who became his guardians. He was made to dress in English clothing, taught the English language. He was taken to church from then onwards. His hair was cut, even though his long, uncut hair had major religious significance to the Sikh faith. He was not allowed to interact with his mother, of course. There were no visits, no letters, no forms of communication. In fact, there were many restrictions on who he could interact with. It was clear that the aim was to make him as anglicized as possible. As a teenager and under the guidance of the Logans, he converted to Christianity. He was taught a very English way of life. His language, culture, and religion were cut off from him, and he became a ward of the British. Here he could be molded to how the British wanted him to be. In 1854, at the age of 16, he was sent to Britain to quell any possible uprisings that could occur in his name, where essentially he lived the life of an English gentleman. He became a favorite of Queen Victoria, and during this time it seems that any letters mother or son tried to send to the other were intercepted. Maharani Jind Kaur finally reunited with her son in 1861 after 13 years of separation. Her son was now an adult in his early 20s. The British government finally granted them permission to meet each other at Spencer's Hotel in Calcutta, but did not allow both mother and son to remain in India. They were given permission to travel to England in order to live together, and so Maharani Jind Kaur accompanied her son to England. She understandably hated the British. Not only did they take their kingdom, but they took her son. But it was clear that her love for her son was greater than her hatred. Maharani Jind Kaur and her son spent 2 years in England. They stayed at his various estates. On the 1st of August, the rebel queen Maharani Jind Kaur died in her sleep at Abingdon House in Kensington. She was 46 years old at the time. Despite having very bad eyesight and her health failing at this point, and the many years lost between them, it seems that the Maharani was successful in one last thing. She was able to remind her son of his Sikh identity and culture, because years later he did in fact revert to his Sikh faith and even try to reclaim his land. But after the Maharani's death, a new crisis broke out for Duleep Singh, who wanted her cremated, but British law did not permit it. Her last wish was that her ashes be taken to the samadhi or tomb of her husband, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, in Lahore. To this, the British did not agree, for they claimed it would lead to a massive funeral procession and a revolt. So a compromise was reached, and the Maharani's dead body was not buried but interred in an underground grave room in the Kensal Green Cemetery in London. It took Duleep Singh a whole year to reach an agreement with the British, who decided that they would build a samadhi in Bombay, where they would cremate the body in a secret ceremony at night on the river. A memorial was built, and there lay the ashes of the last Maharani of Punjab. The Maharani's granddaughter, Princess Bamba Duleep Singh, moved to Lahore and worked to get permission to shift the ashes of the Maharani to where the samadhi of Ranjit Singh is, as was her last wishes. After a lot of effort, Princess Bamba was successful. The ashes of Maharani Jindan Kaur came to Lahore in 1924, 63 years after her death. No plaque was allowed. Within the northeastern end of the Badshahi Mosque or the southwestern end of the main samadhi, the ashes lie. Amazingly, all record of the incident or the ashes or the agreement were removed from the files of the Punjab government. Before I end this video, which I really loved researching for and reading about, because I do find Maharani Jindan Kaur to be one of the most fascinating women in history, period, I do want to mention another woman who is documented as being a major part of the Maharani's life, and this was her woman servant named Mangla. Mangla really came to be the Maharani's right-hand woman. Mangla is also included as a character in some historical fiction novels on both the Maharani and her son. What is fascinating is that one of the very few people that she trusted in her lifetime was not any of the male ministers in her court or any man in her council. It was in fact her woman servant named Mangla. Finally, I have a book recommendation for you guys. The first time I ever read about Maharani Jindan Kaur was when I picked up this book by the Indian writer Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. This is a historical fiction novel. It was published in 2021 and the title is The Last Queen. And it's obvious that the writer did a lot of research for this book, but the writer is able to build on the historical facts that exist to create this very enchanting narrative from the point of view of Maharani Jindan Kaur herself. The book does an amazing job of giving the Maharani a voice. It is able to celebrate her life and her legacy, but it showcases her in all her complexities and humanness. So this is the recommendation I give to you. I hope you guys pick this up.